Hi, and welcome to the Book Pharm podcast, a podcast started by two very bored pharmacy technicians looking for a hobby. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started.
All right, so we left off last time.
A very long time ago.
Yeah, quite some time ago. In part 4, Gasperi was about to set off in his first, not his very first, wait.
No, he just had interviewed the old man.
Yeah, he just interviewed the old man. Okay. But he's about to go on his mission to speak with Olive, because he talked to even Edwin and Paul about Paul is Vincent's brother.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Edwin, he spoke to him
as the priest. Yes. And then Zoe again had warned him, hey, don't.
Yeah, you're time traveling, but that doesn't mean that you can interfere with other people's lives, and more importantly, their deaths.
Yeah, and she's like, it's very important. She's like, you know that Olive Llewellyn is going to die, like, in 2 weeks after you speak to her. So, don't mess with the timeline. So part 5 is from Olive's perspective. Is it in Olive's perspective? No. It's
more like in her timeline.
It's in her timeline.
It's still written in third person, but it's like in her timeline.
Yeah. Because we do find out what...
It's in her year.
Yeah. So Gasperi is interviewing Olive, and he's like, hey, you know, this chick...
What would you do if somebody told you that you were going to die in 2 weeks?
Yeah, he does say that to Olive. He's like, well, what would you do if somebody told you were going to die very, very soon? And Olive was like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah, like, what do you mean?
What do you mean? And Olive, like, panics, okay? So, like, he told her without really telling her, right? And she returns home immediately. She doesn't stay there. She goes home, and her husband's like, what are you doing back home?
Yeah, like, you still have 2 more weeks of your book tour.
Yeah.
And she had, like, caught, like, the last, like, I guess plane, you would call it.
Yeah, like, pod, almost, because she
the last pod.
Yeah, she lives on the moon. So, but, like, as soon as she gets home, and she, like, scrubs herself down, you know, like decontaminates herself, basically, because she thinks, like, you know, this pandemic is going to get really serious. And I think part of it is that she wrote this book, which is also kind of, like, influencing her thoughts, her paranoia about pandemics and things like that. Oh, yeah, so as soon as she decontaminates herself, right, she scrubs herself down, sirens go off on the moon saying that, you know, the pandemic has moved even to the moon now. So she's like, well, that was a wild experience, right? She's kind of, like, freaking out still about it. Like, she's like, I was supposed to die.
Yeah, like, I was gonna die.
Yeah, she was like, I was supposed to die. So, she and Dion is her husband, and Sylvie, they try to adjust to life.
Indoors, like, with school and work, they are tied to this thing that's kind of like the Zoom was for us during COVID. But except, like, their entire bodies, it's like augmented reality. Like, their entire bodies are in the simulation.
Yeah, they call it the hollow space. So, like, it's they're like there, but they're not there. It's like, it's pretty wild. So they're, like, working through that. And Olive gives, like, many lectures through the hollow space to many, like, lecture halls through there. And she talks about what, like, a lot of people ask her, like, why do people write apocalyptic novels? And she kind of talks about that. She says a lot of people talk about, she's like, the reason, she was like, I would say, is because of the element of heroism, that act of, I guess, it's an apocalypse and people want to be the hero, I guess. But so one night, amongst all this chaos, Olive goes out to the garden. She goes outside to her little garden, and she's just trying to, you know, like, calm down. And she overhears Gasperi and Zoe having a conversation. So, you know, the time travelers. And Zoe is, like, kind of like telling off Gasperi, like, hey, you weren't supposed to tell her.
Yeah. You weren't supposed to tell her she's gonna die.
Yeah, and she's all like, you know, Olive was supposed to die. So now Olive knows, like, confirmed. She was gonna die. Yeah, she was gonna die. And that would be crazy to think about. It's like, oh, I was supposed to die.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's still bothering her. Especially now that it's, like, confirmed. And then we move on to part 6. So the end of this book is, like, it came really, really fast. The chapters were, like, maybe a couple pages long. So I would say, like, the chapters are almost like the parts.
Well, it felt kind of like a rush.
Yeah,
like,
it was
not like a bad
fast.
rush. It was
Not
like a
bad.
good rush, like a, you know, like how you would see in a movie where people are, like, cutting between time zones of how it all goes together. And
yeah,
like
it
that.
was written like that, for sure.
So, Gasperi eventually is, like, found, taken back to the Time Institute, and he's put in this, like, of course he gets, like, discharged. He can't work there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets put in, like, this, like, time machine, I guess you would call it. Yeah, like a time machine. And, of course, they're like, you will now, like, we have to banish you in time. Like, yeah.
Because he messed with the timeline.
Yeah. And so as he steps in, he starts to think that he sees Ephraim, his friend, stepping in. Well, he is sent to... What year is it that he's sent to?
Well, before that, Zoe gets him, like, real quick sent to each of the timelines to go try to fix.
To try and fix it, try and cover it up.
Yeah, so like, he goes... Yeah, so he's trying to... So before that, he really... Like, it happens really, really fast. In between Ephraim and that, Zoe, like, takes him back in time to try to talk to Edwin. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And... Well, he goes to the... First, he goes to the forest where Vincent first took the footage of the anomaly, which was, like, the timeline blurring, basically. So he sees that, and then he's, like, freaking out a little bit because he experienced it in that timeline when Vincent took the footage of it. And then he passes news to Zoe that, hey, this file corruption is real. Like, he's like, if people maybe know that, like, hey, I know for real that, like, this is, like, a real thing. It's not just, I don't know. But he thinks that will, like, give him forgiveness for what he did with Olive. But yeah. And
it doesn't.
It doesn't. He manages to get sent to 1918 to be with Edwin to try to change his sad ending, because Edwin, like, died 48 hours after learning he was, like, the heir of his family, because both of his brothers died in the war. Anyway, life was pretty bad for him. He, like, dies really terribly from the Spanish flu. So then Gasperi tells him, like, gives him some peace, like, you're not crazy. You did witness this crazy thing that happened. Like, it's okay, you know? And Edwin's like, okay, I have some peace. And then he dies 38 days later of the Spanish flu. So he didn't really get his happy ending. And then he gets a recording of Vincent telling the story of the corrupted file. We learn that Morella never actually killed Vincent's husband when she mentioned that back.
Yeah, like, way in the beginning.
Yeah, she never went and killed Vincent's husband, but she did remarry and kind of had a happy ending. And then Gasperi adds a destination to his journey right before he's supposed to go back, right? Oh, that's when he visited Edwin. He figured out the whole Vincent thing, then went to go visit Edwin to save him. But that
was too late.
Yeah, it was too late. So, and then that's when they just decommissioned him.
Yeah, so Ephraim steps in here with him, and they are like popped out in the middle of nowhere, right? There's two men sitting under a bridge, and Ephraim shoots them and kills them and then leaves.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, like, he hears, there's two little girls there. They're walking, and he says, Mirella, which is where we get from the beginning when Mirella knew that he was the man that killed those two men under the bridge, is he was saying Mirella as like, oh, this is what she meant. Because earlier she had just ran off screaming.
Right.
Well, he's taken to prison. I almost said Azkaban.
He went to Azkaban?
He went to Azkaban.
Dang.
No, he's taken to prison, and he spends like a good portion of his life there, and he ends up in the hospital with cardiac issues. And all of a sudden, his sister Zoe, like he, his life's flashing before his eyes, and then all of a sudden, his sister Zoe is there.
You hear that thunder?
I do hear the thunder.
Yeah, his sister Zoe is there, and she puts a new tracker in his arm. So, like, now they can't track, because he was supposed to be staying in this timeline where Ephraim left him, right? Mm-hmm. So she puts, like, so they're making sure he stayed there. And then she puts a new one in, I guess taking out the old one, and puts a new one in. So I guess maybe she can track him, but, like, they can't.
It's like a disabler or something. Like, I think that's what it means, is it's like a disabler.
Okay, so, like, they can't track him anymore. But Zoe explains, like, she went to prison, too, for, trying to send him, because she, like, sent him on another mission, but when they were trying to decommission him and, get rid of him.
Yeah, she was being bad, too.
Yeah, so she got out of prison, got a new job, she saves Gasperi, and then takes him to 2172. And she basically set up this whole new life for him, and he's like, oh, well, 2172, that's 23 years from when I will come back to, like, or I will come
from when I interviewed that man in the subway station.
Yeah. And then he gets plastic surgery, so he gets a new face, so people, I guess, can recognize him. And then Gasperi's like, hey, so he has, like, these two neighbors on this, like, homestead that these two ladies have. It's like, their names are Clara and Miriam. Mm-hmm. And she has, like, this violin. She's like, oh yeah, I've never played it. And he was like, well, it's really beautiful. I want to learn how to play it. And Clara's all like, well, we have this neighbor named Lena. She can give you lessons. She plays the violin. So he goes over to Lena's house, right? And you'll never guess who Lena is.
Lena is Talia. So back in the beginning of the story, Talia tells Gasperi that her dad, was kind of pushed to the side by the Time Institute. And I think, if I remember correctly, that's what got her in trouble. She was, like, just talking mess about the Time Institute.
Yeah.
And that got her fired, decommissioned, and turns out that Zoe had actually found her the same place, like the same situation as Gasperi, had found her a place in this timeline. Well, isn't this just a match? Because these two end up married.
Right, yep, they get married. So, like, time is passing very quickly. And then Clara and Miriam, they're pretty old when...
Yeah, they're two old women, and so they die, right?
They die, but they leave the farm to Gasperi and Talia.
Mm-hmm. So they, like, kind of live out the rest of their days, and Gasperi's coming to the conclusion that even if his life is simulated, like his sister had been worried about this whole time, at least it was a good life. Like a good life is a life, and I'd rather have that than no life.
Yeah. He said a life is still a life. And then he's sensing, they're getting old, and he's all like, oh, I feel like Talia's gonna die, which was like, oh, okay. And then next chapter, Talia died.
She's dead.
Yeah, Talia died of an aneurysm in her sleep at the age of 75. And then Gasper's like, well, now I'm depressed, so he like moves to the city, leaving this homestead behind.
Yeah, he kind of moves into like downsizes. I mean, it's just him.
Yeah.
He's tired. He's old, and he plays the violin.
Yeah, and he's playing the violin, and he's like sitting there thinking about life, and then he's like, "Oh, holy crap! I'm old. I play the violin,
and I'm sitting in a subway station,
and I'm sitting in an airway terminal.
Terminal.
Yeah, and and then he's all like, "Oh crap!
Wait a second. If I turn to my right, it's me."
Right? Yeah. He's like, "Oh, that's my younger self," and he realizes, "Oh shoot, I'm the anomaly." He's like, I caused all this. The whole like file corruption. It's me.
It's me, and everybody. It's just me.
And so he's like stuck in this infinite loop, and it's like, oh, plot twist. That Gasperi is the reason this stuff has happened.
Yeah. So of course we're like back at the point where he's interviewing himself, which we now know, but we're in the point of view of the older Gasperi, who is like intentionally making it hard for his younger self to interview him, intentionally dodging questions, asking him about Shakespeare, because he knows now, he didn't know what Shakespeare was.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying to make him nervous on purpose, and it was a pretty crazy ending. It was definitely like,
it made all the information bombing like worth it, because then your mind put it all together in one like sentence,
like fatal swoop.
Oh, like when he started playing the violin or things like that, and then he says his name is Alan, and he's like, he's memorized that script from the first interview, so he's just like, yeah. So it was pretty crazy. That's how it ends. It's just with that interview with his younger self. So he's like stuck in this infinite loop. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite an interesting read. I wasn't so sure at first. My first impression.
I know. I thought it was going to be boring at first. I think it's because like the first couple chapters are kind of learning the beginning of each story. So it's like nothing is continuous except for that part, in the air terminal. Like,
Yeah. So it seemed very repetitive, because it was just like each character was having the same experience. It just different, I guess, like settings. So, but it was pretty good. I did enjoy it, especially with that ending. I think it was pretty good. Yeah. So it's definitely a good read.
It's very sci-fi.
Yeah, with time traveling and things like that. That's not really like my thing. Usually is like futuristic sci-fi. But like time traveling sci-fi. Like I'll read dystopian societies, like the future and the world ended basically. But yeah, it was pretty good. The next book we're going to read is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. This was my pick. This last book was Rebecca's pick. This pick, we both haven't read it. It's an Agatha Christie mystery. It's a Hercule Poirot one. I don't really think it matters what timeline. I mean, it might matter a little bit, but not that much. It's like number 4 in the Hercule Poirot. But yeah, so we're reading a murder mystery.
Yeah,
I'm really excited.
I'm pretty excited too, and we hope to have videos out.
Yeah,
more
for sure. Yeah, it's just been crazy lately, but
yeah.
So until next time, we'll be here slinging words and pills to pay the bills. Every time you giggle at the end.